Welcome, dear listeners. Before we descend into the darkness that awaits beyond the ridge, I have a small request. If you find yourself gripped by the terror that unfolds in these pages, if you feel your heart racing and your skin crawling as you journey with Thomas Blackwood into the unknown, please consider subscribing to support more stories like this. And I'm curious, where in the world are you reading this from? Are you safe in your home? Or perhaps somewhere less secure? Drop a comment below and let me know your location. There's something deliciously unsettling about knowing that this tale of colonial horror is being consumed across the globe, in cities and villages, in daylight and darkness. Now then, shall we begin? The year is 1650. The place is Virginia, and 23 men are about to discover that some territories remain unclaimed for very good reasons. Turn down your lights, lock your doors, and whatever you do, don't read this while you're hungry. The morning mist clung to the Virginia settlement like a funeral shroud as Thomas Blackwood gathered his expedition party in the cramped wooden church. 23 souls stood before him, their faces illuminated by flickering candlelight, each one hungry for the promise of unclaimed land and untold riches beyond the Appalachian Ridge. "Gentlemen," Thomas began, his voice carrying the authority of a former captain in Cromwell's army, "we stand at the threshold of destiny. Governor Berkeley himself has granted us charter to explore and claim the territories west of here. The savages speak of a valley so fertile that corn grows twice as tall as a man, where rivers run thick with fish, and where no European foot has ever trod." Thomas was a man carved from oak and iron, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by 35 years of war and wilderness. His dark eyes held the kind of determination that made weaker men follow without question. Beside him stood his younger brother, William, whose scholarly demeanor and careful notes would document their journey into history. Among the party were the Pemberton twins, Jacob and Ezekiel, trappers who knew the frontier better than any psalm, Father Matthias, a Puritan minister with more zeal than sense, Samuel Good, a physician whose hand shook from too much drink, and young Christopher Wren, barely 17, seeking adventure far from his father's tobacco plantation. They departed at dawn on October 3rd, 1650, a train of pack horses laden with muskets, powder, salted pork, and seeds for planting. The settlement's gates closed behind them with a finality that Thomas tried to ignore. His wife, Eleanor, had begged him not to go, her hands clutching their infant son. "There are whispers, Thomas," she had said, her voice breaking. "The Indians speak of a place where men go mad, where the forest itself hungers." He had kissed her forehead and promised to return before winter. For the first 3 days, the journey proceeded, without incident. They followed Indian trails through dense forests of oak and pine, crossing streams swollen with autumn rain. The Pemberton twins proved invaluable, reading signs in the wilderness that Thomas's military training had never taught him. They encountered a small band of peaceful Monacan Indians on the 4th day, who traded them smoked venison for steel needles. "Don't go west past the Standing Stones," the eldest Monacan warned in broken English, his face grave. "That land belongs to the Wendigo, the hunger spirit. No man returns from there." Father Matthias scoffed. "Pagan superstition. There is no demon that the Lord's light cannot dispel." But Thomas noticed how quickly the Monacans departed after the warning, how they looked over their shoulders at the distant mountains with something approaching terror. On the 7th day, they found the Standing Stones. 3 granite monoliths, each twice the height of a man, stood in a clearing that felt wrong somehow. The trees around them were twisted, their branches reaching toward the stones like grasping fingers. Birdsong died in this place. Even the wind seemed reluctant to stir the leaves. Carved into each stone were symbols unlike any Thomas had ever seen. Not Indian pictographs, but something older, more deliberate. Spirals that hurt to look at. Figures with too many limbs devouring smaller figures. And everywhere, mouths. Open mouths with rows of teeth, screaming silently in granite. "We should turn back," Christopher whispered, his young face pale. "This is a place of evil. This is precisely where we must go," Thomas replied, though his own heart hammered against his ribs. "Governor Berkeley wants knowledge of what lies beyond. We are not children to be frightened by rocks. William was already sketching the symbols in his journal, his hand moving rapidly across the page. These aren't Indian markings, he muttered. The style is wrong. Too geometric, too intentional. They camped that night a mile past the stones, though none of them slept well. Samuel Good drank himself into a stupor while Father Matthias prayed loudly enough to wake the dead. Thomas kept watch, his musket across his knees, staring into the darkness between the trees. Something was watching them. He could feel it the way a deer feels the hunter's eyes. The forest had grown quiet in a way that spoke of predators, not peace. At dawn, they found the first body. It was Jacob Pemberton who discovered it, or rather, what remained of it. He'd gone to check the horses and returned at a run, his face the color of ash. Something's wrong with the animals, he gasped. And there's... Jesus Christ, there's something you need to see. The horses were gone, not escaped. The ropes had been cut with deliberate precision. But it was what lay beyond the picket line that stopped Thomas's breath in his throat. A human skeleton hung from a tree branch, suspended by what looked like its own entrails, dried, and hardened into rope. The bones had been cracked open lengthwise, the marrow sucked clean. But that wasn't the worst of it. The skull had been positioned to face their camp, and someone had carved a message into the tree trunk beneath it. Turn back the hungry ones, wait you are the harvest. The letters were crude but unmistakable, cut deep into the bark and darkened with what could only be old blood. Who could have done this? Christopher asked, his voice breaking. Indians? Ezekiel shook his head slowly, examining the ground around the tree. No tracks. Not Indian, not white man, not animal. It's like whoever did this just appeared here. Nonsense, Father Matthias declared, though his hands trembled as he clutched his Bible. Someone is trying to frighten us. Probably French trappers protecting their territory. But Thomas had fought in the English Civil War. He had seen what men could do to each other in the name of God and King. This was different. This spoke of an appetite that transcended mere violence. We need to decide, he said, gathering his men. We can turn back now, report what we found, return with a larger party. Or we can press on. We've come too far to turn back, Samuel said, his breath reeking of rum. I'll not return to Berkeley empty-handed. They took a vote, 13-10, in favor of continuing. That was their first mistake. The three men who wanted to turn back, two laborers named John Finch and Robert Moss, and a young carpenter, Daniel Price, agreed to stay with the majority. But Thomas saw the fear in their eyes, and he knew he should have listened to it. The forest changed after the standing stones. The trees grew thicker, their trunks twisted into shapes that resembled human forms in torment. The underbrush rustled with movement that stopped whenever anyone looked directly at it. And there was a smell faint at first, but growing stronger with each mile like spoiled meat left too long in the sun. On the 9th day, they found the village. It appeared without warning, a clearing in the dense forest, where perhaps 50 structures stood in neat rows. But calling them houses would be generous. They were frameworks of human bones lashed together with sinew, covered with hides that Thomas hoped were animal, but suspected were not. Dear God, William breathed, his journal falling from nerveless fingers. The village was empty, but signs of recent habitation were everywhere. Fire pits still smoldered with coals. Racks of meat hung drying in the autumn air, meat with fingers, with toes, with faces frozen in expressions of terror. In the center of the village stood a larger structure, a temple or meeting house. Its entrance a gaping mouth lined with real human teeth embedded in the doorframe. Father Matthias vomited onto the ground. Samuel Good's shaking hands reached for his flask, only to find it empty. Even the Pemberton twins, hardened frontiersmen both, stood frozen in horror. We're leaving, Thomas said, his voice steady despite the ice in his veins. Now, back to the settlement. We'll bring the militia. Burn this abomination to the ground. But when they turned to retreat the way they'd come, the forest had changed. The trees seemed closer together. The paths they'd followed vanished, and in the shadows between the trunks, figures moved. They were human-shaped, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, their limbs bent at angles that defied anatomy. Their skin was the color of old leather, stretched tight over bones that jutted at sharp angles. But it was their faces that would haunt Thomas for what remained of his life. Wide, lipless mouths filled with teeth filed to points, eyes too large and too empty, and expressions of insatiable hunger. "Form a line," Thomas shouted, raising his musket. "Fire on my command!" The creatures didn't charge. They surrounded the expedition in absolute silence, moving with an eerie coordination that spoke of hive intelligence. Thomas counted at least 30 of them, though more emerged from the forest with each passing second. "What are they?" Christopher whimpered, raising his own weapon with shaking hands. "Demons!" Father Matthias declared, raising his cross. "Agents of Satan himself!" But Thomas knew better. These weren't demons. They were men, or had been once. Men who had crossed some threshold of hunger and depravity so profound that they had become something else entirely. The largest of them stepped forward, and Thomas's blood ran cold. It wore the remnants of a European coat, now little more than rags hanging from its skeletal frame. Around its neck hung a tarnished silver cross. This thing had been a Christian once, perhaps even a minister, like Father Matthias. It opened its mouth and spoke. The voice was like wind through a corpse, a wet rattling that might have been English once. "Welcome, brotherses. We have waited, so hungry, so long hungry." "Fire!" Thomas screamed. The puppet, clearing, erupted in thunder and smoke. Musket balls tore through the creatures, and several fell, but not all. And those that fell rose again, their bodies knitting together around the wounds, their hunger undimmed. "Run!" Ezekiel shouted. "Into the village! We can fortify one of the structures." They ran, these 23 civilized men, their scientific certainty and religious faith shattered by the reality of what pursued them. Behind them, the creatures loped forward on all fours now, moving with the terrible speed of predators who have cornered their prey. They barricaded themselves in the bone temple, stacking the macabre furniture against the entrance while the things outside circled and waited. Through the gaps in the bone walls, Thomas could see dozens of them now, perhaps hundreds, emerging from the forest in silent anticipation. What do they want? Daniel Price sobbed, clutching a musket he didn't know how to reload. Samuel Good laughed, a broken sound. "Isn't it obvious? They want to eat us. We're cattle that walked willingly into the slaughterhouse." Night fell, and the creatures began to sing. It wasn't music, not really. It was a rhythmic clicking and moaning that vibrated through the bone walls and settled into Thomas's chest like a second heartbeat. The sound wormed into his mind, bringing with it visions of feasting, of tearing flesh from bone, of the ecstasy of consumption. His mouth watered. His stomach cramped with a hunger he'd never felt before. "It's getting in our heads," William gasped, pressing his hands to his temples. "The sound! It's making me hungry. So hungry." "Pray," Father Matthias commanded, though his own voice was ragged with desire. "Resist Satan's temptation. Get thee behind me, Satan." But prayers seemed hollow things in this place. The hunger grew, spreading through the trapped men like a disease. Thomas found himself staring at Christopher's throat, at the pulse beating beneath the skin, and wondering what it would taste like. He shook his head violently, trying to clear the thoughts. No. He was civilized, English, Christian. He would not succumb to such base desires. The siege lasted through the night. The creatures made no attempt to break through their barricades, content to wait and sing their terrible song. As dawn approached, Thomas realized why. They weren't trying to break in. They were trying to break them. "We can't stay here," he told William, who nodded weakly. His brother's eyes had taken on a glassy quality, and saliva dripped from the corner of his mouth. "When the sun rises, we make a break for it. Head east, back toward the settlement. Some of us will die, but some might make it." "Or all of us die," Samuel muttered. "And then they feast. Better a quick death than whatever they have planned," Jacob Pemberton said. He checked his musket, his trapper's hands steady despite everything. I'd rather take a few of those devils with me. As the first rays of sunlight penetrated the forest canopy, the singing stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. Thomas peered through a gap in the bones and saw the creatures had withdrawn slightly, forming a corridor that led east. "They're letting us go," Christopher said hopefully. "They're showing us the way out." "It's a trap," Ezekiel said flatly. "They're hurting us somewhere." "What choice do we have?" Thomas replied. He began pulling away the barricade. "On my signal, we run. Stay together. Don't stop for anything." They burst from the bone temple like foxes fleeing hounds, sprinting down the corridor of creatures that stood on either side like grotesque spectators. The things made no move to stop them, simply watched with those hollow, hungry eyes. They ran for hours, the forest a green blur around them, their lungs burning, their legs cramping, and always just out of sight. The creatures kept pace, herding them deeper into the wilderness, away from safety, toward something worse. They burst into a clearing just as the sun reached its zenith. Before them lay a valley, and in that valley stood a town. But it was no ordinary town. The buildings were constructed entirely of human remains, walls of skulls mortared with dried blood, roofs thatched with hair and hide. A church spire made of femurs pointed toward an indifferent sky. In the town square stood a marketplace where cuts of human meat hung from hooks, merchant stalls displaying organs preserved in clay jars, and a well whose depths promised water but delivered only darkness. And the people. Dear God, the people. They walked the streets in thousands, each one gaunt and hollow-eyed, their teeth filed sharp, their fingers tipped with yellow claws. They wore the remnants of European clothing, doublets and breeches, bodices and skirts like a mockery of civilization. As Thomas and his men stumbled into their town, the residents stopped their activities and turned as one. The largest of them, a creature wearing what had once been a fine gentleman's coat, stepped forward. It smiled, revealing rows of teeth. "Welcome," it said in perfect cultured English. "Welcome to New Salem. We have been expecting you." Thomas raised his musket with shaking hands. "What is this place? What are you?" The creature's smile widened. "We are what you will become, given time and hunger. We are the truth that civilization tries to hide, that man is meat, and meat is meant to be consumed. Come, let us show you to your quarters. The harvest feast begins tonight and tomorrow," it added, its eyes gleaming with ancient hunger. "We teach you to properly prepare your first meal. Your brother, perhaps, or that delightful young man there." It gestured toward Christopher, who whimpered and pressed himself against Thomas's back. "We're prisoners here, aren't we?" William said quietly. The creature nodded. "Prisoners, guests, converts, the words mean so little in the end. You'll understand soon. Enough. The hunger makes philosophers of us all." As they were led deeper into the town, past sights that shattered sanity, Thomas caught a glimpse of something that made his blood freeze. In one of the houses, visible through a window of stretched skin, he saw a woman nursing an infant. But the woman's teeth were filed to points, and the child in her arms was far too still. And when she looked up and met his eyes, he saw that she was feeding, not nursing. This was no temporary settlement. This was a civilization. A society built on the consumption of human flesh, operating in the heart of the American wilderness, hidden from all maps and all knowledge. How long had it been here? How many expeditions had vanished into its maw? That night, chained in a cellar that stank of old death, Thomas listened to the feast above. He heard the screams, brief and quickly silenced. He heard Father Matthias praying until his voice gave out, then heard something worse, the minister laughing, a sound of pure madness or revelation, he couldn't tell which. And he heard the hunger in his own belly, a gnawing need that grew stronger with each passing hour, whispering terrible things, promising relief if he would just give in, just take that first bite, just cross that threshold from man to monster. "Thomas," William whispered in the darkness, "I think I understand now. I think I know why we came here." "What do you mean?" "They called us Somehow, across all those miles, they called us, fed thoughts into our minds, dreams of fertile valleys and unclaimed land. They needed fresh stock, new blood. We walked right into their larder. Thomas wanted to deny it, but the truth of it settled into his bones. Every decision that had led them here, every choice that seemed so rational at the time, they had been guided, manipulated, drawn like moths to a flame. Then we're doomed? He said simply. Perhaps, but not yet. I've been watching them, Thomas. They have rules, rituals, weaknesses. If we're clever, whatever William was about to say was cut off by the opening of the cellar door. Light flooded in, silhouetting a figure that had once been human. The Master wishes to see you, it said. Both of you. It's time you learned the truth about this place, about what you'll become. They were led through torchlit tunnels deep beneath the town, past chambers that served as nurseries, kitchens, and workshops, a complete underground civilization dedicated to the cultivation and consumption of human livestock. They passed a room where children played with bones as toys, another where elderly creatures sat telling stories in a language that predated English, and finally, they came to a great hall where hundreds of the things sat in council. At the head of the hall, on a throne of skulls, sat the Master. It was ancient, this thing. Its skin had the texture of old parchment, its eyes the cloudy white of cataracts, but its voice, when it spoke, held the authority of centuries. Thomas Blackwood, it said, and hearing his name from that lipless mouth made Thomas's stomach turn. William Blackwood, do you know what I was before I became what I am now? They shook their heads. I was Sir Walter Crenshaw, appointed by King James to explore the territories west of Jamestown. That was in 1609. I led a party of 60 men into these woods. By the time winter came, we were starving. The Indians had withdrawn, taking their food with them. The land provided nothing. We ate our horses first, then our boots, then our dead. The Master leaned forward, its ancient eyes gleaming. And then we learned that there are things far older than European civilization in these woods. Spirits, entities, call them what you will. They taught us the truth that survival demands sacrifice, that humanity is just another word for weakness, that the strong devour the weak, as nature intended. That first winter, we became what you see before you. Not demons, not monsters, simply honest. We embraced our place in the food chain, and we thrived. Look at what we've built. A society free from the hypocrisies of so-called civilization. We take what we need. We waste nothing. We are pure in a way your Christianity can never understand. Thomas found his voice. You're murderers, cannibals, abominations against God and nature. The Master laughed, a sound like wind through dry bones. Is the wolf a murderer for eating the rabbit? Is the bear an abomination for fishing in the stream? We are what men become when stripped of their delusions, and you will join us, not by choice perhaps, but by necessity. The hunger will see to that. Never, Thomas spat. We'll see. Take them to the preparation chambers. Let them watch tonight's feast. Let them see what becomes of those who resist too long. What happened in the preparation chambers shattered something fundamental in Thomas's mind. He watched as his men, good Christian men, who had trusted plain Tim, were processed like livestock. Some fought and were broken. Some begged and were ignored. And some, God help them, some simply gave in, accepting the inevitable, their humanity draining from their eyes as the hunger took hold. Young Christopher was the first to break. They sat him in a room with a single piece of meat, human, unmistakably so, and nothing else. For 3 days they left him there, the hunger growing until it eclipsed reason, morality, everything that made him human. When they finally opened the door, Christopher fell upon the meat like a starving dog, and once he had eaten, once he had crossed that threshold, there was no going back. Thomas watched the change come over the boy's face, the guilt, the horror, and then the acceptance. The next night, Christopher dined with his captors willingly. By the third night, he was helping them prepare the next meal. "You see," the master said, showing Thomas and William through a one-way mirror. "Civilization is the place, thinnest of veneers. Hunger is honest. Hunger is truth." One by one, Thomas's expedition fell. Some quickly, some after weeks of resistance. Samuel Good hanged himself with his own belt rather than give in, and they cut him down and ate him anyway. Father Matthias lasted 12 days before his faith cracked, and Thomas heard him through the walls, quoting scripture to justify his transformation. "This is my body, which is given for you. Eat in remembrance of me." Jacob Pemberton killed his twin brother Ezekiel with a rock to the head, then wept as he consumed him, the hunger too strong to resist. "Better I kill him quickly than let them do it slowly," he sobbed, his mouth full of his brother's flesh. Within a week, he was hunting in the woods with the others, laying traps for unwary travelers. And through it all, the master watched and waited, always asking the same question. "Are you ready to embrace the truth? Are you ready to become honest?" Thomas and William held out longer than most. They supported each other, reminded each other of their humanity, spoke of their families waiting back in Virginia. But the hunger was relentless. It filled their dreams with visions of feasting. It made their stomachs cramp and twist. It whispered that just one bite would end the suffering. On the 40th day of their captivity, the master made them an offer. "You're strong, Thomas Blackwood, you and your brother both. Most men break within a fortnight. You've lasted more than a month. Such willpower is rare, valuable. I propose a bargain. Join us willingly. Lead hunting parties. Bring others to our table as you were brought. Do this, and you may keep your brother alive. Refuse, and you'll watch us prepare him for tomorrow night's feast while you're forced to partake." Thomas looked at William, saw his brother's gaunt face, his hollow eyes, the way his hands trembled with starvation. They had been given no food since their capture, only water. The human body could survive for weeks without food, but the toll was terrible. "And if I agree?" Thomas asked. "If I become like you, what happens to Eleanor? To my son?" The master smiled. "They need never know. Return to the settlement. Report that your expedition was lost to Indian attacks or disease. Live your life. And when we call you, and we will call you, you'll bring us fresh meat. Your family will be safe. Your secrets will be kept. You'll even be paid in gold. For we have much gold here, taken from previous expeditions. This is the devil's bargain." William breathed. "There is no devil," the master replied. "Only hunger and satisfaction. Only predator and prey. Choose quickly, Thomas. Your brother grows weaker by the hour." And there, in that bone chamber beneath a cannibal city, Thomas Blackwood faced the choice that would define what remained of his soul: save his brother by becoming a monster, or maintain his humanity and watch William die horribly. He opened his mouth to answer. The words died on Thomas's lips as the chamber door burst open. One of the creatures rushed in, its movements agitated, breaking the eerie calm that typically characterized these things. "Master," it hissed, its filed teeth clicking together. "The hunters report strangers on the eastern ridge. A large party, perhaps 30 men, well armed. They follow the same trail that brought these ones." The master's ancient face twisted into something that might have been concern. "How long until they reach the valley?" 2 days, perhaps 3. The master stood from its throne, its skeletal frame unfolding to a height that seemed impossible. "Then we must accelerate the harvest. The town must be emptied before they arrive. We cannot risk discovery by a force that large." It turned to Thomas and William, its cloudy eyes gleaming with ancient calculation. "Your decision comes sooner than expected, Thomas Blackwood. But the offer remains. Join us, and you and your brother walk out of here as free men. Refuse, and you'll be part of tonight's feast." "And this new party?" Thomas asked, his mind racing. "What happens to them?" "The same that happens to all who wander into our territory. They'll be observed evaluated, and harvested in due time. Unless the master leaned close enough that Thomas could smell the decay on its breath. Unless you help us, lead them here. Tell them you escaped, that you need rescue. Bring them to us, gift-wrapped in trust. Thomas felt William's hand grip his arm, a warning and a plea simultaneously. But his brother was dying, slowly starving to death in this underground hell. And beyond that, 30 more men were walking into a trap they couldn't imagine. I need time, Thomas said. Time to think. To pray. The master laughed, that terrible dry bone sound. Prayer won't help you here. God abandoned this place long ago, but I'll give you until dawn. Decide quickly, Thomas Blackwood. The hunters grow impatient, and your brother grows weak. They were thrown back into their cell, but this time they weren't alone. Someone was huddled in the corner, a figure Thomas hadn't seen in their previous captivity. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realized with a shock that it was Daniel Price, the young carpenter who had been among the first to vanish weeks ago. But Daniel was different now. His eyes held a terrible lucidity, and when he spoke, his voice was clear and steady despite his emaciated condition. They think I've gone mad, Daniel whispered. I let them think it, babbled and raved and smashed my head against the walls. But I've been watching, learning, and I think I've found a way out. There's no escape, William said dully. We've been over every inch of this place. Not up, Daniel replied. Down. These tunnels, they're old, ancient. The cannibals didn't build them, they just found them and made them their own. But I've seen marks on the walls, symbols that match the standing stones. This place is older than the town, older than Crenshaw's expedition. Something was here before, something that taught them to hunger. Thomas crawled closer. What are you saying? I'm saying that whatever created the hungry ones, whatever spirit or entity or demon turned Crenshaw and his men into these things, it came from below. And I think it's still down there, sleeping, or waiting, or watching. I've heard sounds at night, from the deepest tunnels, where even the cannibals won't go. A kind of breathing, a heartbeat that shakes the earth. You have gone mad, William said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Maybe, Daniel admitted, but I'd rather die trying to find the truth than die in their cooking pots. There's a passage 3 levels down that leads to the deep places. I've been stealing tools, collecting supplies. Tomorrow night, during the feast, when they're all distracted, we could try. Or we could accept the master's offer, Thomas said quietly, voicing the thought that had been gnawing at him. Lead those 30 men to salvation. Warn them off. Send them back to Virginia. Daniel's laugh was bitter. You think the master will honor that? You think these things have honor? They'll make you watch as they eat your brother. Then they'll force you to eat him too. And then, when you've finally broken, when you've crossed that line you can never uncross, they'll send you out as their hunting dog. And you'll do it. Because by then, you'll be one of them. The truth of it settled into Thomas's chest like a stone. He looked at William, saw his brother's resignation, and made his decision. Tell me about this passage. Daniel's plan was desperate and likely suicidal, but it was something. As he outlined the route through the deep tunnels, Thomas committed every detail to memory. They would need to move during the feast, when most of the creatures were above ground and glutted on human flesh. They would need to bypass the nursery levels, where the young ones slept fitfully, and they would need to reach the forbidden depths before the alarm was raised. And if we find this entity you speak of? William asked. What then? Then we kill it, Daniel said simply, or we die trying. But maybe, just maybe, if we destroy the source of their hunger, the spell breaks. Maybe Crenshaw and his people return to what they were. Maybe the curse ends. It was a thin hope, built on supposition and desperation. But it was hope nonetheless. Dawn came too quickly. The master arrived with an entourage of its most trusted hunters, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Your answer, Thomas Blackwood. Thomas stood, drawing himself up to his full height despite the weakness of starvation. I have a counteroffer. The master tilted its head, curious. "Oh? Let me see these approaching men. Let me evaluate the threat they pose. If they're merely another expedition like mine, I'll help you harvest them. But if they're militia, if they're Apennine, soldiers sent by the governor, then helping you would be suicide. I'd be caught between your hunger and their justice." The master considered this, its ancient mind turning over the logic. Finally, it nodded. "Reasonable. You and I will observe them together. If they prove to be soldiers, we'll allow you to escape and lead them away. If they're just explorers," its lipless mouth stretched into a smile, "then you'll keep your end of the bargain. And William, Daniel, they stay here. Insurance that you'll return." It was the best Thomas could hope for. As he was led from the cell, he caught William's eye and gave the slightest nod. His brother understood. Tonight, whether Thomas returned or not, William and Daniel would make their attempt on the deep tunnels. The journey to the eastern ridge took most of the day. The master moved with surprising speed for something so ancient, its long legs covering ground that would have winded a younger man. They were accompanied by a dozen hunters, moving through the forest like ghosts, leaving no trail. As they climbed toward the ridge, Thomas noticed something odd. The forest was dying. Trees that had been healthy when his expedition first passed now stood gray and leafless. The earth beneath his feet felt spongy, diseased. And the smell, that terrible smell of rot, grew stronger with every step. "Your valley is dying," Thomas observed. The master's face showed no emotion. "All things die. That's why we must constantly expand, constantly hunt. The hunger consumes more than just flesh. It devours the land itself. In another year, perhaps 2, this valley will be barren. Then we'll move on, find a new home, build a new town. We've done it before. We'll do it again." "How long?" Thomas asked. "How long have you been doing this?" "I told you I was transformed in 1609. But we weren't the first. The entity below taught others before us. Spanish explorers in the 1542, the lost colony of Roanoke. Even earlier, the Anasazi to the west abandoned their cities, not from drought, but from hunger. The entity is old, Thomas, older than human civilization. It's been teaching us its truths for millennia." They reached the ridge as the sun began to set. Below, moving through the valley, Thomas could see the approaching party. But these weren't explorers or adventurers. They were soldiers, hard men with military bearing, moving in formation, well-armed and disciplined. At their head rode a figure Thomas recognized with a jolt of shock. Captain Richard Morrison, Eleanor's brother. His brother-in-law had come looking for him. "Militia," the master hissed, "sent by the governor. They know." "How?" Thomas breathed. "We've been too bold. Too many expeditions vanished. Too many men failed to return. They've connected the disappearances. This is a punitive force, sent to investigate and eliminate any threat." Thomas's mind raced. Richard Morrison was a capable soldier, a veteran of wars against the Indians, but he had no conception of what he was walking into. 30 men, no matter how well armed, stood no chance against hundreds of creatures that couldn't truly die, that could recover from wounds that would kill normal men. "We must return to the town," the master said. "Prepare the defenses. If they've come seeking monsters, then monsters they shall find. Or," Thomas said carefully, "I could go down there, warn them off. Tell them I escaped, that there's nothing here but wilderness. They'll believe me, I'm family." The master turned those ancient eyes on him. "And why would you do that? What's to stop you from telling them everything?" "Because you hold my brother," Thomas said. "Because if I betray you, William dies screaming. But if I send them away, if I save you from a costly battle, then you let us both go. That's the new bargain." The master studied him for a long moment. Thomas could see the ancient intelligence working behind those cloudy eyes, weighing options, calculating probabilities. Finally, it nodded. "You have until the moon rises. Send them away, and you and your brother walk free." But know this, Thomas Blackwood, if you try to warn them, if you give them even a hint of what dwells in this valley, I'll know, and I'll make William's death last for days." They bound his hands loosely, tore his clothing to make him look like an escapee, and even inflicted superficial wounds on his arms and face. Then they pushed him down the slope toward the militia camp. Thomas stumbled through the forest as the sun touched the horizon, his mind churning with impossible choices. He could warn Richard, tell him everything, but William would die horribly. He could lie, send them away, but doom future expeditions to the same fate. Or he could do something else, something desperate that might just save everyone, or kill them all. He burst into the militia's camp at a run, collapsing dramatically at the picket line. Hands grabbed him, pulled him, toward the firelight. He heard Richard's voice before he saw his face. "Dear God, Thomas! Thomas! Someone bring water!" Richard Morrison was everything Thomas was. Not polished, refined. A gentleman soldier who fought by the rules of civilized warfare. His face showed genuine relief as he cradled Thomas's head. "We thought you dead," Richard said. "Eleanor has been beside herself. What happened? Where are the others?" Thomas let his desperation show it wasn't difficult. "Dead. All dead. Indians attacked us past the ridge. I'm the only one who escaped." "Indians?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "What tribe?" "I don't know. They spoke no language. I recognized. They were different, wrong somehow." "We need to leave this place, Richard. Turn back now. There's nothing here but death." Richard helped him to a sitting position, offered him water from a canteen. "We found your trail, followed it this far. But we also found other things, bodies, or what was left of them, and those standing stones with the carvings." He paused, his voice dropping. "What's really out here, Thomas?" Thomas felt the weight of the master's threat. One wrong word, and William would die. But looking into Richard's honest face, at the 30 men who had come to rescue him, he couldn't send them away in ignorance. "My place, one, Holy and Hyde. One place." "Listen to me carefully," Thomas said, keeping his voice low. "There's something in this valley. Something that was here long before the Indians, before us, before anyone. It's made a home here, and it's hungry, always hungry." "What kind of something?" "Men, or they were men once. They've become. I don't have words for what they've become. But they're many. They're organized, and they cannot be killed by conventional means. Your 30 soldiers won't be enough." Richard's hand moved to his sword hilt. "Are you saying there's a hostile settlement here?" "I'm saying there's a civilization of monsters that will slaughter every man you brought. You need to return to B, Virginia. Bring more men, 100 at least, and burn this entire valley to bedrock." One of Richard's lieutenants, a grizzled veteran named Sergeant Hawkins, spat into the fire. "Begging your pardon, sir, but this sounds like fever talk. The man's been through an ordeal. He's not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly," Thomas insisted. "And I'm telling you that if you advance into that valley, you're all dead men." Richard studied him for a long moment, then made his decision. "We'll camp here tonight. In the morning, you'll guide us to where your expedition was attacked. We'll assess the threat and proceed accordingly. If what you say is true, we'll retreat and return with reinforcements. But I won't turn back based solely on one man's account, brother-in-law or not." It was a reasonable compromise, and exactly what Thomas had feared. By morning, the master would assume he'd failed. William would be dead, and these 30 men would still march into a trap. Unless— "Richard, I need to tell you something else. My brother William, he's still alive. They're holding him prisoner in their settlement. If we attack, he dies. But if we're clever, if we're quiet, we might be able to rescue him and burn the place down around them in one stroke." This changed the equation. Richard leaned forward, interested now. "Tell me everything. Every detail of this settlement, their numbers, their defenses." And so Thomas did. But as he spoke, carefully revealing the truth while omitting certain key details like the fact that bullets barely slowed these creatures, or that there were hundreds of them, not dozens, he was formulating a plan. A desperate, probably suicidal plan, but one that might just work. He told Richard about the town structure, about the tunnels beneath, about the nightly feasts when most of the creatures gathered above ground. He told him about Daniel Price's discovery of the deeper passages. And he told him about the entity below, the source of the hunger. "You're saying there's some kind of demon or spirit at the root of this?" Richard asked skeptically. "I'm saying there's something down there that turned civilized men into cannibals and has sustained them for decades. Call it what you will. But if we destroy it, maybe we destroy them." Sergeant Hawkins laughed. "And how do you propose we kill a demon, sir? With prayer and holy water?" "With fire," Thomas said simply. "These tunnels, they're old and dry. If we could get enough black powder into the deep levels, set it off when the creatures are all above ground at their feast, we'd collapse the entire system. Bury them all, including whatever entity spawned them." Richard considered this. "We brought powder, 2 kegs, meant for blasting if we needed to clear obstacles. It could work, but we'd need to get it into position without alerting them, and we'd need to time it perfectly." "I can get us in," Thomas said. "I know the layout now, and tonight is their feast night, I know, because they were preparing for it when I escaped. They'll be distracted, glutted, vulnerable. We strike at midnight when they're at the height of their revelry. It was a lie built on truth. Tonight was indeed a feast night, but Thomas would be expected back at the valley by moonrise. When he didn't return, the master would know he'd betrayed them. William and Daniel would be killed immediately. Unless... "There's one more thing," Thomas added. "We need a diversion, something to draw their attention away from the tunnels long enough for us to plant the charges." "What did you have in mind?" Thomas looked at the 30 men around the campfire, each one young and strong, each one ready to die for Virginia, and he made a choice that would haunt him forever. "We split our force. 10 men come with me into the tunnels with the powder. The other 20 attack the town from the east at the same time, making as much noise as possible. The creatures will focus on the obvious threat while we plant the charges below. Once we're clear, we light the fuses and run. The explosion brings down the town and buries everything." "You're asking me to send 20 men on a suicide mission," Richard said flatly. "I'm asking you to save the colony," Thomas replied. "If these things spread, if they move east toward the settlements, how many will die? Hundreds? Thousands? This is our chance to end it here. Now. Forever." The camp fell silent. Thomas could see the men processing what he was asking, the magnitude of the sacrifice. Finally, Sergeant Hawkins stood. "I'll lead the diversion," he said. "Been soldiering for 20 years. Figure I'm due for a proper last stand. Any man wants to join me. Step forward." Slowly, deliberately, 19 men stood. Not the youngest, Thomas noticed. The veterans, the ones who understood what was being asked and accepted it with the grim resignation of old soldiers. Richard gripped Thomas's shoulder. "If this goes wrong, if you're lying or mad or misguided, Eleanor will kill me for getting you killed. If I'm lying or mad or misguided, Eleanor will be dead within a year anyway," Thomas said. "Along with everyone else in Virginia, this is the only way." They prepared through the evening, working with quiet efficiency. The powder kegs were wrapped in oiled cloth to protect them from moisture. Long fuses were prepared that would give them time to escape before the explosion. Weapons were checked, prayers were whispered, and final letters were written for those who expected to die. As the moon rose, Thomas led them toward the valley. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Even the usual night sounds, owls, insects, rustling leaves, had fallen silent. It was as if nature itself recoiled from what was about to happen. They crested the ridge and looked down on the town. Even from this distance, Thomas could see the feast had begun. Fires blazed in the town square. The creatures danced and capered around the flames, their shadows grotesque on the bone walls. And at the center of it all, on the skull throne, sat the master, presiding over its flock. "Dear God," Richard breathed, "you weren't lying. What are they?" "Monsters," Thomas said simply. "Our future, if we fail." They descended into the valley, moving with the stealth of experienced soldiers. The diversion force split off to the east, circling toward the town's main entrance. Thomas led the remaining 10 men, Richard, 2 soldiers named Parker and Welsh, and 7 others whose names he forced himself to memorize, down into the ravine that concealed the tunnel entrance he and Daniel had used during their captivity. The entrance was unguarded. The creatures were too confident, too certain of their dominance in this valley. Thomas led them down into darkness, carrying torches that cast dancing shadows on tunnel walls carved with those terrible spirals and hungry mouths. "Stay close," he whispered. "These passages twist and turn. One wrong corridor, and we could wander for days." They descended through 3 levels, passing chambers that made even the hardened soldiers blanch. Nurseries where young creatures slept in nests of human bones. Storerooms filled with preserved meat that had once been people. A library of sorts, where books bound in human skin detailed recipes and preparations. At the 4th level, Thomas paused. According to Daniel's map, the deep passages lay ahead. But to reach William and Daniel, they'd need to take a detour. He made a decision. "Richard, take the men and the powder forward. Follow this passage until you reach a great cavern. You'll know it when you see it. Plant the charges there and prepare the fuses. I'm going to get my brother. Thomas, if I'm not back in half an hour, light the fuses anyway. Don't wait for me. Don't risk the mission. Just do it." Before Richard could argue, Thomas was running down a side passage, his torch casting wild shadows. He knew he was probably too late, knew the master would have executed William and Daniel the moment Thomas failed to return by moonrise. But he had to try. He found the cell empty, the door hanging open. His heart sank. Then he heard sounds from deeper in the complex, screams, not of pain, but of fury. Fighting. Thomas ran toward the sounds and burst into a vast chamber. What he saw there would be seared into his memory forever. William and Daniel were alive, barely. They fought back to back against a dozen creatures, using improvised weapons, a sharpened bone, a rock, a length of chain. They were losing, bleeding from a dozen wounds, but still fighting with desperate ferocity. And beyond them, at the far end of the chamber, was the entrance to the forbidden depths. A circular opening in the floor, stairs descending into darkness so absolute that even torchlight seemed afraid to penetrate it. From that darkness came a sound, a breathing, a heartbeat, just as Daniel had described. Something vast and ancient stirred in those depths, drawn by the violence above. "William!" Thomas shouted. His brother's head snapped around, hope and horror warring on his face. "Thomas, get out! It's waking! The hunger, it's waking!" But Thomas was already moving, his musket raised. He fired into the mass of creatures, the report deafening in the enclosed space. 2 fell, more surprised than hurt. It bought William and Daniel seconds to reach him. "The passage!" Daniel gasped, his face pale with blood loss. "We were trying to reach it when they found us." "Change of plans," Thomas said, pulling them toward the exit. "We're blowing the whole place sky high. Come on." But the creatures blocked their path, more pouring into the chamber with every second. And from the depths, something was rising. Thomas could feel it, a presence so vast and alien that his mind recoiled from comprehending it. The temperature dropped, frost formed on the walls, and the hunger. Oh, God, the hunger. It crashed over them like a wave. A ravenous need so profound that Thomas's stomach cramped and his mouth flooded with saliva. He looked at William, at Daniel, and for one terrible moment, he saw them as meat, as food, as the solution to an emptiness that gaped within him like a bottomless pit. "It's taking control," Daniel gasped, pressing his hands to his head. "The entity, it's trying to turn us." "Fight it," Thomas commanded, but he could feel his own will weakening. The hunger wasn't just physical. It was metaphysical, a void that demanded to be filled, that would never be satisfied. This was what had broken Crenshaw and his men. This was the source of the curse. From above came the sound of gunfire and screams. Sergeant Hawkins and his men had begun their assault. The creatures in the chamber hesitated, torn between the intruders and their depths. and the attack on their town. It was the opening Thomas needed. "Now!" he roared, and they ran. They burst from the chamber with creatures in pursuit, racing through the tunnels toward where Richard and the others waited. Behind them, the presence from the depths followed, a darkness that devoured light, a hunger that consumed hope. Thomas could feel it reaching for them with invisible tendrils, trying to drag them back, to make them part of itself. They reached the great cavern where Richard had planted the charges. The powder kegs sat at strategic points around the chamber's supporting pillars, fuses ready to be lit. Richard and his men had their muskets raised, pointed at the tunnel entrance. "Light them!" Thomas screamed. "Light them now!" "But we're not clear," Richard protested. "Light them, or we're all dead." The first creatures burst into the cavern, and Richard made his decision. He touched his torch to the nearest fuse. It caught with a hiss, sparks racing along the braided cord toward the powder. "Run!" They ran through tunnels that shook with the pounding of hundreds of pursuing feet. Behind them, the creatures howled, no longer silent, their hunger given voice at last. And beneath it all, Thomas heard something else, a roar that seemed to come from the earth itself, the entity's rage at being disturbed, at being threatened. The first fuse reached its keg. The explosion was catastrophic. The blast wave threw them forward, flames pursuing them through the passages. The tunnel collapsed behind them, tons of rock and earth sealing off the pursuit. But more fuses were burning, and the entire complex was coming down. They burst from the tunnel entrance into the night air, just as the second charge detonated. The ground heaved beneath their feet. In the town, the creatures screamed as their sanctuary collapsed beneath them. Buildings made of bone crumbled. The skull throne shattered. And the master, ancient, terrible, almost unkillable, was buried beneath 1,000 tons of rubble. The third explosion created a sinkhole that swallowed half the town. The fourth triggered a chain reaction that brought down the entire valley floor. Thomas watched from the ridge as the cannibal civilization that had existed in secret for decades was erased from the earth, in fire and dust. "The diversion force?" Thomas asked quietly. Richard's face was grim. "I heard the fighting stopped 5 minutes ago. They bought us the time we needed. Every one of them. 20 men dead. Sergeant Hawkins and his volunteers, their sacrifice allowing the mission to succeed." Thomas added their names to the list of ghosts that would haunt him. As the sun rose over the devastated valley, Thomas, William, and Daniel stood with Richard and the 7 surviving soldiers. They had won. The entity was buried, the creatures destroyed, the threat eliminated. Virginia was safe, but the victory felt hollow. Thomas kept waiting for the hunger to return, for that terrible emptiness to reassert itself. He examined his hands, half expecting to see claws. He watched William and Daniel, looking for signs of transformation. "It's over," Richard said, trying to sound convinced. "Whatever that thing was, it's dead now, buried under half a mountain." "Is it?" Daniel asked softly. "Or is it just sleeping, waiting for someone else to dig deep enough, to hunger enough, to find it again?" Thomas had no answer. They burned what remained of the town, salted the earth, and marked the valley on every map with warnings that would last for generations. Then they returned to the Virginia settlement, carrying their dead, their wounded, and their secrets. Eleanor wept when she saw Thomas alive. She held him and their son, and asked no questions when he woke screaming from nightmares. She noticed when he couldn't eat meat for months afterward, when he flinched at the sight of blood, when he sometimes stared at her with a look in his eyes that she didn't recognize. But she never knew the truth. None of them did, except for those who had been there. And they made a pact, the survivors, to never speak of what they'd found beyond the ridge, to let the valley be forgotten, to allow the maps to grow vague about that region, to discourage all future exploration. It should have been the end. It wasn't. 3 months after their return, a traveler arrived at the settlement. He was gaunt, hollow-eyed, his clothes hanging from a skeletal frame. He asked about Thomas Blackwood, said he had a message. Thomas met with him in private. The man's smile revealed teeth filed to points. "The master sends its regards," the man whispered. You thought you killed us all. But some of us were out hunting when you brought down the tunnels. And the hunger, oh Thomas, the hunger never dies. It's spreading, east, west, north, south, teaching others, making more of us. Your victory was just a setback. We are the future of mankind. The honest future. Thomas killed him, of course, crushed his skull with a fireplace poker and burned the body in secret. But he knew the truth. You couldn't kill an idea. You couldn't bury a hunger that lived in the human heart. The entity might be trapped beneath the mountains, but its gift had already spread. Its truth had found fertile ground in the worst parts of human nature. And sometimes, late at night, Thomas still felt it. The hunger, not for food, but for something more fundamental. A gnawing emptiness that whispered seductive things about survival, about the natural order, about what men could become if they shed the last chains of civilization. He resisted. Every day, he resisted. He watched his son grow, tended his tobacco farm, went to church and prayed to a God he wasn't sure was listening. But he knew, deep in his soul, that the war wasn't over. It had just moved inside him, inside all of them. And one day, when the world grew dark enough, when hunger grew strong enough, when civilization's thin veneer finally cracked, the hungry ones would return. 10 years passed like a slowly closing fist around Thomas Blackwood's life. The settlement grew. New families arrived from England, drawn by tales of fertile land and opportunity. The Virginia colony expanded, pushing ever westward, and with each new farm carved from the wilderness, Thomas felt a creeping dread. They were getting closer to the valley, closer to the buried evil that slept beneath the mountains. He tried to warn them, in subtle ways. He spoke to the governor about leaving certain territories unexplored, about establishing boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. But how could he explain without revealing the truth? And how could he reveal the truth without being called a madman? The nightmares never stopped. Every night, Thomas descended into those bone tunnels, felt that terrible hunger, watched his men die again and again. Eleanor learned not to wake him violently once. In the grip of a dream, he'd nearly strangled her before recognizing her face. After that, she slept in a separate room, and the distance between them grew from a few feet to miles. His son, Thomas Jr., was 10 now, a bright boy, with his mother's gentle nature and his father's stubbornness. Thomas watched him play with the other children, laughing and carefree, and felt a cold dread. What world was he growing up into? What waited for him beyond the safe boundaries of the settlement? William had married and started a family of his own, but he wasn't the man he'd been before the valley. He drank too much, spoke too little, and sometimes Thomas caught him staring into the distance with that same haunted look they all shared, the look of men who had seen the truth and couldn't unsee it. Daniel Price had become a recluse, building a cabin far from the settlement and venturing into town only for supplies. Rumor had it he'd filled his cabin with Christian symbols and religious texts, that he slept with a loaded musket across his chest. Some called him touched by God. Others called him mad. Thomas knew better. Daniel was the sanest of them all, the only one who had fully accepted what they'd faced. Richard Morrison had returned to England 2 years after the Valley incident, citing family obligations. But Thomas knew the real reason. His brother-in-law couldn't bear to stay in Virginia, couldn't sleep in a land that held such horrors. Before he left, Richard had gripped Thomas's hand and said, "It's still out there, isn't it? Growing, spreading. I can feel it." Thomas had no answer to give him. The first sign that their victory had been incomplete came in the winter of 1660. A family went missing from the northern settlements, the Hendersons, good Puritan folk with 4 children. A search party found their cabin intact, food still on the table, but no trace of the family themselves. Just tracks leading into the forest. Strange tracks that were human-shaped but wrong somehow, too long, with too much space between the toes. Thomas joined the search, though every instinct screamed at him to stay away. They followed the tracks for 3 days until they reached a clearing where the snow had been melted away in a perfect circle. In the center of that circle, they found bones, picked clean, cracked open for marrow, and arranged in the same spiral pattern that had decorated the standing stones. Indians? One of the searchers suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. No, Thomas said flatly. Something else. They burned the bones and marked the area on the map with a warning. But Thomas knew it was too late. The hunger had found new vessels, new converts. The entity's gift was spreading. Over the next year, more families vanished. The pattern was always the same: isolated homesteads, no signs of struggle, tracks leading into the wilderness. The Virginia authorities blamed wolves, Indians, anything but the truth. But Thomas saw the pattern. It was radiating outward from the valley, a slow infection spreading through the colony. He tried to fight it. He organized patrols, established watchtowers, convinced the governor to create safe zones that shouldn't be settled. But you can't fight an invisible enemy. You can't patrol against an idea. And the hunger was patient. It could wait years, decades, for the perfect moment to strike. Then came the letter. It arrived in May of 1661, carried by a merchant ship from Massachusetts Bay Colony. The handwriting was shaky, desperate, but Thomas recognized it immediately. It was from Father Matthias, the minister from his original expedition, the one Thomas had watched break under the hunger's influence, the one who should have died in the valley. Thomas Blackwood, I am alive. God forgive me, I am alive when I should have perished with the others. When the tunnels collapsed, a few of us were spared, those of us who had already been changed, already welcomed the hunger into our hearts. You think you destroyed us. You think you buried the evil and cleansed the world. But you only scattered the seeds. We are everywhere now, Thomas. In Massachusetts, in Pennsylvania, even in Virginia, closer than you think. We hide in plain sight, living among you, pretending to be human, while we feed our hunger in secret. I write to you not to gloat, but to warn. The Master survived. It crawled from the rubble, ancient and terrible, and filled with purpose. It has a new plan now, one that makes the old valley settlement look like a crude experiment. It's going to the cities. Boston, New York, Philadelphia. Anywhere humans gather in numbers, it's going to teach the hunger to thousands. And Thomas, it wants you. It's never forgotten your betrayal. It's coming for you and yours, for William, for Daniel, for Richard, for everyone you love. Not to kill you, no, to convert you, to make you watch as everyone you care about is transformed into what we are, to show you that you were always meant to join us. Run. Take your family and run west, beyond the mountains, beyond the frontier. Maybe you'll find safety there. Or maybe you'll just find more of us, waiting with open mouths and empty bellies. Asterisk, may God have mercy on your soul, for we will have none. Father Matthias, first apostle of the new flesh Thomas, read the letter 3 times, each reading driving the cold deeper into his bones. Then he burned it, watching the paper curl and blacken. But he couldn't burn the truth. The Master lived. The hunger spread. And his family was in danger. That night, he called a meeting of the survivors. William arrived drunk, as usual. Daniel came armed with enough weapons to outfit a militia. They met in Thomas's barn, far from listening ears. It's not over, Thomas said, simply, showing them a copy he'd made of the letter. It was never over. William's face crumpled. I can't fight it again, Thomas. I haven't been able to eat properly in 10 years. I see their faces every time I close my eyes. I can't. You don't have a choice. Daniel interrupted, his voice hard. None of us do. We either fight or we join them. There is no middle ground. What can we do? William asked. If they're everywhere, if they're in the cities, among the people, how do we fight that? Thomas had been asking himself the same question for days. Finally, he'd reached a conclusion he didn't like, but couldn't avoid. We go back to the valley. Silence. Then William laughed, a broken sound without humor. You've gone mad. We buried it. We won. Did we? Thomas challenged. Or did we just make it angry? That entity, the source of the hunger, we buried it, but we didn't kill it. As long as it lives, as long as it sleeps beneath those mountains, the curse will spread. We need to go back. We need to finish what we started. And how? Daniel asked quietly. Do you kill something that ancient? That powerful? We barely survived our first encounter, and we had 30 armed men. Now there's just 3 of us. Older and slower and Kelter, broken. We use what we learned, Thomas said. The entity feeds on human hunger, human depravity. It transforms that natural appetite into something monstrous. But what if we could starve it? What if we could deny it the very thing it needs to survive? You're talking about a ritual, Daniel said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Something to cleanse the land. Thomas nodded. I've been studying, reading old texts, talking to medicine men from the local tribes. There are rituals, ancient ones, designed to purify places of power, to drive out evil spirits and seal them away forever. But they require sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? William asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. The willing kind, Thomas said softly. The entity feeds on unwilling victims, on the violation of human dignity. But what if we gave ourselves willingly, not as food, but as a seal, our lives freely given to bind it forever? You're talking about suicide, William, breathed. I'm talking about salvation, Thomas corrected. Not just for us, but for everyone. If we can seal that entity, truly seal it, so it can never be freed, then the curse ends, the hunger dies with it, our families are safe, the colony is safe, humanity is safe. Daniel was nodding slowly. It makes a twisted kind of sense. The entity corrupts willing surrender into consumption. But true sacrifice, given freely in love, rather than taken in hunger, that would be its opposite, its natural enemy. This is insane, William said. But there was resignation in his voice. We survived 10 years, built lives, families, and now you want us to throw it all away on the hope that some Indian ritual might work against an entity we barely understand? I want to sleep without nightmares, Thomas said quietly. I want to look at my son without wondering if he'll grow up in a world where monsters walk as men. I want to die knowing I did something that mattered. Don't you? The question hung in the air. Finally, William nodded. When do we leave? Tomorrow night, Thomas said. We tell no one. If we fail, if we die, let our families believe it was an accident. Better they mourn us as men than know we fell to monsters. And if we succeed? Daniel asked. Then maybe, Thomas said, the world gets a chance to be what it should have been all along. The next day was the longest of Thomas's life. He spent it watching Thomas Jr. play, memorizing every detail of his son's face. He held Eleanor one last time, breathing in her scent, feeling her warmth against him. He wanted to tell her the truth, to explain why he had to do this. But how could he? How could he burden her with knowledge that would haunt her forever? That night, he left a letter on his desk. It explained everything, the valley, the hunger, the entity, the threat that still existed. He told her he loved her, that everything he'd done was to protect her and their son. And he asked her to forgive him for the man the horror had made him. Then he kissed his sleeping son's forehead and walked away. William and Daniel were waiting at the edge of the settlement, pack horses loaded with supplies. They had everything they needed for the journey: food, weapons, and the materials for the ritual. A Monacan shaman named Falling Leaf had given them the ceremony's details in exchange for Thomas's promise that if it worked, the tribes would be left in peace. It was a promise Thomas hoped someone would honor after he was gone. They rode west through the night, following the same trail they'd taken 11 years before. The forest felt different now, darker, more watchful, as if it sensed their purpose. Occasionally, Thomas caught glimpses of movement in the shadows, figures that were almost human. Almost. They're following us, Daniel said on the second day.
The hungry ones. They know where we're going.
Let them follow, Thomas replied. Let them watch. Maybe they'll learn what real sacrifice looks like. The standing stones appeared on the fourth day, unchanged and eternal. The spiral carvings seemed to move in the corner of Thomas's vision, mouths opening and closing in silent hunger. They made camp there, preparing for the final leg of the journey. That night, the creatures came, not to attack, but to talk. The master stepped into their firelight, its ancient body moving with the same terrible grace Thomas remembered. It had survived the collapse, though it bore new scars, entire sections of its body reconstructed with bits of different people, like a grotesque patchwork. Thomas Blackwood, it said, its voice like wind through a tomb. You return. How? Consider it. We've come to finish what we started, Thomas said, raising his musket. The master laughed. With what? Bullets? Fire? We've learned from our mistakes, Thomas. We're not all gathered in one place anymore. We're scattered, hidden, everywhere. You can't kill us all. You can't even find us. We are legion now. We are inevitable. We're not here to kill you, Daniel said quietly. We're here to kill your master. The master's lipless smile faltered. The entity? You think you can harm it? It's beyond death, beyond comprehension. It existed before your civilization, and will exist long after. Maybe, Thomas said, but we can put it to sleep. We can seal it away so deep, so completely, that even if humanity someday finds it again, they'll have the wisdom to leave it alone. And the cost? The master asked. What are you willing to pay for this sealing? Everything, William said simply. The master studied them for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, it stepped back. Go then. Go to the deep places. Face the entity if you dare. Know that if you fail, if you falter even for a moment, it will consume you. Not your bodies, your souls. Everything you are, everything you were, everything you might have been. Complete and utter annihilation. Better that, Thomas said, than becoming you. The master's expression, if it could be called that, shifted into something that might have been respect or pity. You're wrong. You know. About us. About the hunger. It's not evil. It's honest. It's humanity stripped of pretense, reduced to its most fundamental truth. We're all predators, Thomas. We just had the courage to admit it. No, Thomas said firmly. You're what happens when humans forget they can be more than their appetites. You're what we become when we stop trying to be better. And that's exactly why you have to end. They rode past the master, past the watching creatures, toward the ruins of the valley. The devastation from their attack 11 years ago was still visible: collapsed tunnels, shattered bones, scorched earth. But nature was reclaiming it slowly, grass and small trees growing through the rubble. In another generation, no one would know a town of monsters had stood here. They found the entrance to the deep tunnels, half buried but still accessible. The same cold air flowed from it, carrying that terrible smell of ancient hunger. The same heartbeat pulse echoed from below, steady and patient. Last chance to turn back. Thomas said to his companions. No, William said. There isn't. They descended. The tunnels were partially collapsed from the explosion, but enough remained to guide them down. The walls here were different from the upper levels, older, carved with symbols that predated human language. This wasn't built by Crenshaw's people, or even by whatever came before them. This was primal, a temple from the dawn of time. The deeper they went, the stronger the presence became. It pressed against their minds like a physical weight, whispering seductive truths about survival, about the food chain, about humanity's place as both predator and prey. Thomas felt his mouth watering, his stomach cramping. The hunger rose in him like a tide. Beside him, William stumbled. I can feel it. Pulling. God. Thomas. I want. I need. Fight it, Daniel commanded, gripping William's arm. We're almost there. Don't give in now. They reached the final chamber, just as their torches began to gutter. It was vast, beyond comprehension, a natural cavern that seemed to extend into infinity. And at its center, surrounded by concentric circles of carved stone, was the entity. It wasn't physical, not exactly. It was a darkness that moved, a void that hungered, a presence so vast and alien that looking at it directly caused pain. It existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, reaching into the past and future, touching 1,000 minds across 1,000 miles. Thomas could see its influence spreading through time, the Donner Party, the Holodomor, every instance of cannibalism throughout human history. All of it touched by this thing. This fundamental aspect of reality that humanity had worshipped and feared since the first human ate the flesh of another. The Wendigo, Daniel, breathed, finally giving it a name. The hunger spirit, the first cannibal, the evil from which all others flow. The entity noticed them. Its attention was like being crushed beneath a mountain. Thomas fell to his knees. William screamed. Even Daniel, strongest of them all, staggered backward. And in that moment of contact, Thomas understood. This wasn't a demon or a spirit. It was a fundamental force, like gravity or entropy. It was the universe's hunger for itself, the cosmic appetite that drove stars to consume planets, species to devour each other, reality to eat its own tail. It couldn't be killed because it was part of existence itself, but it could be contained, bound, sealed away from vulnerable minds. Now, Thomas gasped, pulling out the ritual components. Salt from the sea, to purify. Silver from a church, to sanctify. And their own blood, freely given. They worked with desperate speed, pouring the salt in a circle around the entity's presence, hammering silver, stakes into the cardinal points while reciting the words Falling Leaf had taught them, ancient words in a language that predated all known tongues, words that spoke of binding and sealing and eternal sleep. The entity fought back. It didn't attack, it tempted. Each man saw visions of what they could have. Thomas saw himself returning to Eleanor, telling her the truth, living a full life with his family. William saw sobriety, peace, redemption. Daniel saw salvation, genuine forgiveness, heaven itself opening before him. All they had to do was stop, give in, feed the hunger one more time. Lies, Thomas said through gritted teeth, slicing his palm open and letting blood fall onto the salt circle. You offer us what we already had, what you took from us. We're here to take it back. William and Daniel followed suit, their blood joining his, 3 streams becoming one. The ritual required willingness, sacrifice, the antithesis of the entity's nature. And as their blood soaked into one, the ancient stone, something fundamental shifted. The entity screamed. It was a sound beyond sound, a psychic shriek that rippled through dimensions. Above them, in the town ruins, the hungry ones collapsed as if their strings had been cut. Across Virginia, in Massachusetts, in all the places the hunger had spread, people suddenly felt an emptiness leave them, a whisper fade from their minds. But the ritual demanded more than blood. It demanded everything. The final seal, Daniel said, reading from the ancient text with shaking hands. 3 souls, freely given, to lock the door forever. We have to die here, William finished. Bind ourselves to this place so that it can never open again. Thomas thought of Thomas Jr., of Eleanor, of the life he was giving up. He thought of all the people who would never know what he'd done, never understand the sacrifice. But he also thought of all the people who would live, free from the hunger, free from the curse. For them, he said, simply, and drove a silver stake through his own chest. The pain was indescribable, but brief. As Thomas's blood pumped out onto the ritual circle, he felt his consciousness expanding, spreading through the chamber, becoming part of the binding. He saw William do the same, then Daniel, each man giving himself willingly to seal the entity forever. Their souls formed a cage of silver and salt and sacrifice. The entity thrashed against it, raging at being bound, at being denied its feast. But it couldn't break free. The bars were forged from love, from courage, from the very best of humanity. And against that, mere hunger had no power. As Thomas's vision faded, he saw the future. He saw the valley forgotten, overgrown, lost to maps and memory. He saw the hungry ones withering without their master's influence, either dying or slowly returning to sanity. He saw Father Matthias collapsing in Boston, the hunger finally releasing him after years of torment, dying with prayers on his lips. He saw the Master, ancient and terrible, simply sitting down in the forest and closing its eyes for the last time, its purpose ended. And he saw his son, grown to manhood, living in a world that would never know how close it had come to damnation. Thomas Jr. Would marry, have children, build a life free from the nightmare that had consumed his father? Eleanor would mourn Thomas as a man lost to the wilderness, never knowing the truth. It was better that way. The entity made one final attempt to break free, showing Thomas a vision of the future centuries hence, when mankind would grow complacent, when someone would dig deep enough to find the sealed chamber, when the hunger might rise again. But even as Thomas's consciousness faded, he understood. They hadn't ended the threat forever. They'd simply bought humanity time. Time to grow stronger, wiser, better equipped to face the darkness when it returned, if it returned. His last thought, as Thomas Blackwood's soul merged with the binding seal, was a hope that humanity would be worthy of the sacrifice, that they would learn from their mistakes, resist their darker natures, choose civilization over savagery. It was a thin hope, but it was all he had left to give. The chamber fell silent. 3 bodies lay in the ritual circle, their blood-forming patterns too complex for human eyes to comprehend. The entity raged in its prison, but the bars held. They would hold for centuries, perhaps millennia. Long enough, at least, for mankind to find its way. In the valley above, the hungry ones dispersed. Some died within hours, their bodies unable to function without the entity's animating force. Others lingered, confused, slowly remembering what they'd been before the hunger took them. A few, those too far gone, too transformed, simply walked into the wilderness and were never seen again. The Master stood at the valley's edge, feeling the binding complete, knowing its purpose had ended. It looked east, toward the settlements, toward the civilization it had once been part of. For a moment, just a moment, something human flickered in its ancient eyes. Regret, perhaps, or relief. Then it turned and walked west, into territories yet unexplored, where it would become a legend, whispered by native tribes, the cannibal ghost that haunted the deep woods. The hunger spirit that taught terrible lessons, a warning, a story, a myth. But no longer a threat, Eleanor Blackwood found Thomas's letter 3 days after he disappeared. She read it once, then burned it, just as he'd requested. She told Thomas Jr. that his father had died exploring the frontier, a hero who gave his life for the colony's future. It wasn't entirely a lie. She never remarried. She raised their son alone, instilling in him her late husband's values, courage, sacrifice, the willingness to do what was necessary, even at great personal cost. Thomas Jr. grew into a fine man, a leader in the colony, though he often wondered about the father he barely remembered. Sometimes, late at night, Eleanor would wake with the certainty that Thomas was watching over them, not as a ghost, but as something else, a guardian, a protector standing between his family and darkness they could never comprehend. She was right. The years became decades. The decades became centuries. The valley was forgotten, claimed by forest and time. The tunnels collapsed fully, sealing the chamber where 3 souls stood eternal watch. Occasionally, travelers reported strange feelings in that region, an oppressive weight, a sense of being watched, dreams of vast hunger, but nothing more than that. The entity slept, bound by sacrifice and sealed by love, and 3 ghosts stood guard, eternal and vigilant, waiting for the day when humanity might need them again, or hoping, perhaps, that such a day would never come. The warning doctor, Sarah Chen, examined the ground-penetrating radar results with growing excitement. Her archaeological team had been searching these mountains for months, following legends of a lost colonial settlement. And now, finally, they'd found something. There's a massive chamber system beneath us, she told her graduate assistant, Marcus. Stone construction, definitely man-made. This could be the find of the decade. What about the local warnings? Marcus asked nervously. The park ranger said this area's been considered cursed for centuries. Said people who camp here have terrible nightmares. Sarah laughed. Superstition. Probably just methane seeping from the rocks causing hallucinations. We'll take precautions. She didn't notice the symbols carved into nearby trees, warnings left by Monacan descendants who'd kept faith with Falling Leaf's ancestors. She didn't see the way animals avoided this particular valley, or how plants grew twisted and stunted here. She certainly didn't feel the three souls stirring in their eternal vigil, sensing living humans approaching their ward for the first time in centuries. That night, Sarah dreamed of hunger, vast, insatiable, ancient. In her dream, she stood before a silver circle and heard three voices speaking in unison. Turn back. The binding holds, but grows weak with time. If you break the seal, if you free what sleeps below, the hunger will return, and this time, there will be no one to stop it. She woke screaming, her tent filled with the smell of old blood and older darkness. Around the camp, her entire team was awake, each one pale and shaking, each one having dreamed the same dream. We're leaving, Sarah said, her academic ambitions suddenly meaningless in the face of primal terror. Now, tonight, and we're never coming back. As they packed their equipment with trembling hands, Sarah could have sworn she saw three figures standing at the valley's edge, tall, proud, and utterly still, watching, guarding, waiting. She didn't look back. The valley returned to silence. The entity's prison remained sealed, and three souls settled back into their eternal watch, knowing that they'd bought humanity another day, another year, another generation. How much longer the seal would hold, they didn't know. But for now, it was enough. The hunger slept, and the watchers kept their vigil. Always. Author's note: the Wendigo is a figure from Algonquian folklore, representing the dangers of greed, excess, and taboo breaking, particularly the taboo against cannibalism. This story is a work of horror fiction that uses that mythology as inspiration while creating its own narrative. The historical elements are fictional, though they're set against the backdrop of real colonial America. The lost colony of Roanoke, while mentioned, remains a historical mystery with many theories but no definitive answer. This story explores themes of sacrifice, the thin line between civilization and savagery, and the question of what we're willing to give up to protect those we love. It asks whether evil can ever truly be destroyed or only contained, and whether the cost of containment is worth paying. Sweet dreams. Thank you for surviving this journey. And so we close the chapter on Thomas Blackwood's terrifying expedition into the unknown territories of colonial America. 3 episodes, 3 souls sacrificed, 1 ancient evil sealed away. For now, if you made it this far, if you braved the bone temples and the deep tunnels, if you felt the hunger clawing at your own mind, thank you. Thank you for trusting me to guide you through this nightmare. Before you go back to your normal life, if you can, I have a few requests. Subscribe if you haven't already. There are more dark tales waiting to be told, more forgotten corners of history hiding unspeakable horrors. Like this story, if it gave you chills, kept you reading past your bedtime, or made you look twice at the shadows in your room. Drop a comment below and tell me, which episode terrified you the most? Did you see the ending? Have you ever experienced something in the wilderness that you couldn't explain? And most importantly, do you think the seal will hold? Share this story with someone who loves horror, history, or simply needs a good scare, but maybe warn them not to read it alone, or while they're hungry. A final thought: the next time you're hiking in the mountains and you come across a valley that feels just a little bit wrong, Where the birds don't sing and the trees grow twisted, perhaps you should turn back. Some places are forbidden for reasons our ancestors understood better than we do. The hunger is patient. The hunger is eternal. And the hunger is always, always waiting for someone foolish enough to break the seal. Sleep well, dear reader. And remember, if you wake up in the middle of the night with an inexplicable craving, maybe just have a glass of water instead. Until the next nightmare, your humble storyteller. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to actual persons, living, dead, or transformed into something hungry, is purely coincidental. The Appalachian Mountains are perfectly safe. Probably. We think. Don't quote us on that.